In talking to you today, I want to talk more about personal stories and understand your passion and your work better, and help you understand my passion and my work better, because I think we come from different generations, but our passion and work is very, very similar. So maybe we should start by talking a little bit about you first, and then I can tell you a little bit more about me besides where I got my PhD or what I was doing at the University of Maryland. How many of you are in college or going to college? Fantastic. My daughter is going to college this year, so I can relate to that. How many of you are in high school? The vast majority. How many of you know what your career is going to be? Okay. How many of you really want to feel the world, understand it, and figure it out in the next 5, 10 years? The vast majority of you. Of course, that's the best way to do it, because your generation has the world open to it, perhaps as no generation of girls has had it before. And so a little bit today, I want to talk about generation, time, and space. Our generations have moved very far forward in the last 50, 60 years, especially in North America and Europe, and in many other parts of the world. But there are still so many things that girls and women face across the world that really, really need to improve in order for them to have the rights that they deserve. How many of you know the name of the head of UN Women? Okay, her name is Phumzile. She is from South Africa, and she just took charge of the agency called UN Women, which is the UN agency dedicated to furthering the rights of women and girls. And at the UN, many agencies, in fact, all UN agencies are mandated, required to further the rights of women and girls, as they are mandated to further the rights of all people, the human rights of every person living on this earth. And how many of you are familiar with Hillary Clinton's statement at the Beijing conference in 1994 that said women's rights are human rights? Good, yes. And that's why the UN is mandated to make sure those rights are realized. And one of the most interesting statements that Phumzile made earlier this year, as we move from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals. How many of you know about the Sustainable Development Goals and what they are? Okay, so maybe we can talk about them a little bit more, because it's a very special year, 2015, for you to be here. We are right now framing what the world's development agenda will be for the next 15 years. In 2000, when the world turned to the new millennium, the leaders of the world, a lot of civil society organizations and others, governments got together and said, what do we want to achieve in the next 15 years as we turn the, not just the century, but the millennium? And they set 8 Millennium Development Goals. Gender equality was one of them. And then now, this year, we are looking at, well, what did we accomplish in those last 15 years? We said we would do these 8 things. We would eradicate hunger. We would eradicate poverty. We would have water for everybody. We would make the world be gender equitable. And what have we done, and what do we still have to do? And now we're setting what we are calling the Sustainable Development Goals over the next 15 years. And then the advantage of doing that is that the UN gets together with everybody, private sector, citizens, civil society, governments, and sets these goals, and then governments are accountable. Governments have to look every year, are they moving in sync with these goals or not? And it's in looking at these goals that Phumzile was at a conference a few months ago, and she said, so when is the expiration of this thing called gender inequality? When is it going to expire? When is it that we're not going to be saying, let's try to achieve gender equality? Isn't it time that it expired? Isn't it time that we stop saying it'll take another 100 years, 200 years, 300 years? Do we have that much time to wait? Do the girls of your generation have that much time to wait? For them, this is their lifetime. For them, this is the time that they need to shape their careers. They need to figure out what they want to do in life. They need to be able to say, I will achieve something. I will be a doctor or a scientist or a nurse or a teacher or whatever they want to be. I will get married. I will have children. I will shape somebody's life. I will make a difference. And those are the things I know that you are thinking about right now in your life. It is such an important time in your life to be thinking about those things, because the rest of the trajectory of your life will be shaped by these critical years, because you will learn things, you will reach out to people, you will make connections, you'll make friends. You will have mentors who will help you do those things. And that can't happen unless you have at least that ambition and that desire to make that happen. And sadly, many girls in not only the developing world, but in this world, don't have those opportunities, can't think of their life with that level of ambition. And in my mind, eradicating gender inequality is all about that. It is all about making sure every girl can have a dream, can have a passion, can envision a life in which she sees that she can fulfill herself, whatever way that she chooses to go. So, maybe I can tell you a little bit about myself and see how over the generations we have changed, and maybe how many generations we still have to go. So how many of you know of a place called Punjab, India? Okay, so I was born in Punjab, India, and you heard that I have a PhD in demography. And demography is the science of studying people. And in demography, one of the things that we study the most is the fact that sex ratios in some countries, especially India and China, but increasingly, sadly, in some other countries, are very distorted at birth. What that means is that normally, more boys are born than girls just because biologically, we all think there's an equal 50-50 chance of being born a boy or a girl, but actually biologically that's not true. There's like a 50.5% chance of being born a boy, because whatever it is, the fetus of a boy tends to have a higher chance of dying than the fetus of a girl, biologically. You all have heard that women live longer than men. There's something biologically about women that just makes them live longer than men, okay? And that starts, believe it or not, even at the time of conception. So if doctors count miscarriages, more boys are miscarried than girls are miscarried by just a very slight percent. And so what happens is that the nature has set it up in such a way that slightly more boys are born than slightly more girls, if everything else is equal. And then slightly more boys die during childhood, the early childhood, than girls do. And that's, again, if you are studying health, or if you're studying medicine, or if you're studying demography, you will know that the first year of life, and in fact the first week of life, is the most dangerous for babies. Most babies either survive or die in that first week or the first year. And pretty much, after year 3, 4, 5, the ratio of girls to boys evens out after sort of nature deals with this distortion. So in certain countries, the ratios of babies being born and surviving is grossly distorted against girls. So if 1.03 boys are supposed to be born for every one girl. In reality, we're having like 1.5 boys being born for every girl. And that is partially because parents are pre-selecting before the birth takes place to not have the girl if they find out through a test that the fetus is a girl. And in many cases, they are, after the girl is born, they are not taking care of her as much as they would a boy. If she gets sick, they may not take her to the hospital. If she's being fed, it may not be as good food. If the mother's milk is the best thing for the baby, the mother may wean the daughter earlier. Lots of little subtle things. Sometimes they are not deliberately intentional, they're just cultural practices that are embedded. Other times they are deliberately intentional. And so those countries have what we call missing girls. There are 10 million missing girls who should have been born or survived, and they haven't. Well, the reason I say that this is personal is that there's a district in Punjab, India, that has the worst sex ratio of children at birth in all of India. And guess where I was born? I was born in that district, right? Many years ago, but I was born in that district. And when I was born, my grandmother gave my mother a really hard time. My grandmother had 6 daughters already, and my father was her eldest son, and she had lots of hopes that her son was going to maintain their family in sort of this precarious middle-class existence they were in. My grandfather came from a very rich family that had lost a lot of money, and my grandmother had struggled to somehow manage. And now she was looking for her son to do things, and then his wife gave birth to a girl first thing, and her reaction was, well, now I have 7 girls to worry about and do dowries for and get married and have a burden. That was her reaction, which of course was very sad. That said, it's sort of interesting because over the years since I was born, I was my grandmother's favorite grandchild. Irony, right? She didn't want me to be born, but I was born, and then I was her favorite grandchild. And that said, the fact that my grandmother was so against having a girl in her family, I can also understand where she came from. She was part of a culture in which women had to walk around with a veil because the Raja of the province she lived in was notorious for philandering, and women were very unsafe. And people kept their young daughters and daughters-in-law covered because they were easily molested or sexually harassed. And she was not trained to do anything, and so when her husband couldn't make a living, the only way she could raise her children was by selling whatever jewelry or begging or borrowing from other people. And her son was the one who was going to make those things better. So I can see her perspective. Women in her space didn't have any chance of really moving forward. She was a strong woman, though. She educated all her 6 daughters. She made all of them get college degrees. And all my aunts now are professional women whom I've looked up to. They struggled. They didn't have it easy. But they also taught me how important it was to have faith in yourself and have the skills and the background and the exposure that was necessary to move forward. So when I look at that half-century journey of my life, I can see going from a generation of a very strong woman who had some seriously distorted ideas about girls and boys, but who had to struggle deeply against the odds, to women of my aunts and my mother's generation who had to fight for their rights to work. You know, I still remember when I was a child, it was a matter of pride for my dad that my mother didn't work because he was in the 50s generation that said, well, you know, it was his responsibility to take care of the family, and if his wife worked, that was somehow a judgment on him. But we came to this country when I was 11, and he had no choice. He was going to graduate school, and our family would have starved if my mother didn't work. And she did work, and she changed, and she got a lot more confidence than she had had before. And again, the same father who didn't want his wife to work made sure, his daughter went to an Ivy League university because he was so proud of her that she was going to change the world. So here we are. And the question whether my daughter was born a girl or should go to an Ivy League university or should work or any of those things doesn't even arise, right? I take it for granted. I take it for granted that she would play soccer, that she would have something in sports. I take it for granted that she should study math and science. I take it for granted that she should travel. I take it for granted that she should go places. Does it mean everything is okay? Not always. I still hear about universities where girls are being raped and are insecure from experiencing violence. It worries me that she's going to college and she's going to have to deal with that. The other day she said she was walking home from Metro and was going to take a bus, and some guy drove right along her and kept making signals at her to get into his car. And she said, "Mom, that was so creepy." I'm sure many of you have experienced those things. There are still much, much, much fewer girls in the fields of sciences and math in the United States than there are men. There are still very few CEOs who are female who are telling us how the economy is functioning. We still don't have a female president in the United States. We have ways to go. We still have women and men doing housework, but somehow women taking on the burden of responsibility of managing that house while trying to do everything. So there are many things that we still have in this country that need improvement. There are many things on your sexual and reproductive rights, your right to speak, your right to be who you want to be, that are still limited, that are not in that expiration date of gender inequality expiring. But I hope you will see those challenges as part of the challenges that girls around the world face. And one of the things that we are fighting for at UNICEF. UNICEF is the UN agency that works for the rights of children. United Nations Children's, what was formed as an emergency fund became just United Nations Children's Fund. So UNICEF works across the world on things like vaccinations, immunization, health system strengthening, education, water and sanitation, protection of children in legal and other systems, on nutrition, on social services, on governments having policies that will improve poverty. So many, many things across all parts of the world, and UNICEF is the one agency that has more country offices than any other UN agencies. 150 countries, UNICEF is present and then works with the government and the civil society to help them do what they want to do, because obviously UNICEF can't go and tell a government or a country how they should improve the lives of women, but they really work with the government and the civil society and the private sector to change the things that matter. And you heard earlier that at UNICEF we have a new gender action plan. That's my job to have created and then to implement. My job at UNICEF is to make sure that girls in particular don't get short-shrifted, that whatever is happening in the Sustainable Development Goals, the billions of dollars that are going to go to finance climate change issues, poverty issues, education issues, health issues, that those billions of dollars actually take girls into account and really target the fact that girls don't have it fair, girls' rights are not being realized. And some of the things that are becoming very apparent that I hope you will take with you as you go to Capitol Hill in a day or so, as you listen to the First Lady talk about her passion for girls' education. She and I have had that conversation, and many of us are supporting her in that mission, is that it is really important for the world to have ambition for girls and not just for girls to have ambition for themselves. What we worry as the Sustainable Development Goals are being formed is that there's a tendency to go in small steps, to think, okay, well, in the Millennium Development Goals, we said there should be primary schooling for everybody. Well, we succeeded in getting most kids across the world enrolled in primary schools. Very good, right? And one of the things we tried very hard to do was make sure that girls were enrolled in primary school. And right now, the ratio of girls to boys enrolled in primary school across the world is pretty even. That's great achievement. Problem with that? If they are enrolled in primary school, we still don't know if they actually complete primary school. Being enrolled in primary school is not the same as finishing primary school. We don't know if they actually learn anything while they're in primary school. In fact, we are finding out that people try to do so much in just getting kids enrolled in primary school that they didn't worry about whether they actually learn to read or write or acquire other really important skills while they are. And we also know that for girls across the world, the things that really change their life is secondary school and not primary school. Why? Because it's at puberty and during adolescence that girls really start facing challenges because they become sexual beings, people start protecting them, harassing them, controlling them in much bigger ways than when they are babies. And they get married early, or they are not allowed out of the house, or they're going to experience violence much more often, or they don't have access to transportation, or they don't have access to even menstrual hygiene management when their period comes. How are they supposed to live their lives when those basics are being denied them? So the ante really rises when girls reach adolescence. And that's why I hope you can relate to those girls. Many of the things that you take for granted are things that they can't take for granted. And if we go stepwise, if we say, well, you know what, we had that primary school enrollment goal, let's now have a primary school completion goal, and then 15 years later we'll worry about their being in secondary school. Well, in the meantime, the rest of the world is like not worried about primary and secondary schooling. The world is moving beyond, college education for everybody, and everybody having fundamental IT and communications and other skills, and to be successful, that's what you need. And girls are still, completing primary school. So my message is we've got to be ambitious for girls now, not wait for another 15 and then another 15. So the generations need to move much faster. This generation of girls doesn't have the time to wait 50, 60, 100, 200 years before the next round of opportunity comes. Their life is now. And so I hope that you will think in those ways, you'll relate to them in ways that matter to you as well. How many of you have had a situation where you said, I need an ID card for that? Oh my God, do I have my school ID or my driver's license? Have you had that situation where you showed up and you couldn't find it? Yeah, well, guess what? Most girls in the world are not registered at birth. So they don't have ID cards. They can't prove they were born and who they are and where they belong to. So unless we give them an ID, and we should give, obviously, boys IDs too. All kids should have IDs. But for girls, that IDs matters so much because her access to so many things in life. Just think about how many things you can do with your ID card, right? For them, that matters hugely. And finally, I would say that you will hear a lot when you talk about changing the world and changing the world for girls, about changing social norms. We can't just change how things work. We have to change how people think. That is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. But the way people change how they think has often to do with how things work. Right? We had a winning U.S. soccer team at the World Cup this year. Super. And for the first time, there was a ticker tape parade for a female sports team. Wow. I say that is huge progress. And when I was a kid, you could not imagine that happening. And that happened because there's something called Title IX that makes schools and makes girls be part of sports. Money goes to having girls, still not anywhere close to what the money that goes to boys and men being in sports. But when I was a kid, you just did not see that many girls out there playing anything. Baseball, football, soccer, nothing. Now you see them all over the place. So the way things work is what makes people think, yeah, girls can do that. They can win at soccer. So I want you to think in terms of winning things. So go to Capitol Hill and advocate for serious money to having water and sanitation in schools, for having teachers in school, for getting girls buses to take them to school, and not just changing people's minds that they shouldn't be abusing girls. Of course, people should not be abusing girls, but if girls have safe transportation, if they have female teachers, if they have bathrooms in school, you can relate to that. You've seen stinky, icky bathrooms in schools, right? They don't have any bathrooms in schools. When they have those things, then the mindset changes. So more than anything, I hope you will go out and make things change the way they work, and that'll change minds. Thank you for having me.